Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Fantasy Phenoms. This is going to be episode 2 on the year for you guys. Going to be bringing you the top 25 running backs to play in week 9 of the NFL season. Now, we do have a couple teams on bye weeks right here. Cowboys, 49ers, Browns, Steelers, Broncos, and Giants. So obviously a lot of big names will not be on this list. So that's why we got to make this list for you so you know exactly who to start and maybe who you should stray away from this week. Starting it off hot, we have Austin Ekeler against the Atlanta Falcons coming in at number 1. It's pretty clear he's the running back number 1 overall this year. So you need to be playing this guy each and every week. Atlanta gives up a lot of points on defense, as you saw last week, giving up, I believe it was 34 points against the Carolina Panthers, who have a piss-poor offense overall. So the Chargers are a lot better of an offense than the Panthers. You can expect a lot of scoring in this game. Austin Ekeler has also got 10-plus receptions in 2 straight games now. He's getting those targets from Keenan Allen that was out. Mike Williams has been out. Joshua Palmer was out with a concussion. So you can expect that target share to dip just a little bit, but Austin Ekeler is the clear-cut number 1 in the NFL right now, so you need to be playing him every single week. Coming in at number 2 is Alvin Kamara going up against the Baltimore Ravens. You gotta love what you saw with Kamara last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. Oh my God, 42 fantasy points in PPR formats. That's what you were waiting for. That's the big play potential you're waiting for when you're drafting Alvin Kamara. I know there was a ton of rumors, not even rumors, like if he would be suspended or not. I think he's going to be suspended next year. I think he plays out this whole season. You can be excited about Kamara the rest of the year. He has massive upside because of that pass catching potential. And there's not a lot of great wide receivers healthy on this team right now. You got Chris Olave taking a couple targets away from him. But once Michael Thomas, once Jarvis Landry come back, you'll probably see a little less targets. In a similar situation that Austin Ekeler is succeeding, Alvin Kamara should continue to succeed in a great matchup on Monday night against the Ravens coming up. Coming in at number 3, we have Derrick Henry going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, come on, coming off a massive game right here. 2 touchdowns in the previous game. Also, 200 plus rushing yards. This man is a beast, and there's a lot of questions earlier on in the year. He was struggling a little bit, but I think he's back to his normal self. You're starting Derrick Henry every single week. This Kansas City defense just gave up over, 150 rushing yards to Josh Jacobs about 2 weeks ago. So you know they can be ran on. That's not a problem. With one of the best running backs in the league in Derrick Henry, you can be pretty confident. The only downside I would say in this matchup could be Tennessee falling down early and having to climb back in this one, because Derrick Henry is not quite the pass catcher as a lot of other running backs are in this league. He doesn't really get targeted out of the backfield, so that limits the potential a little bit. This guy's such a good runner, though. You got to be playing him on a weekly basis. Next up might be a little bit of a shocker. We're dropping down a tier. We're going to go Aaron Jones against the Detroit Lions. I think this is a must-win game for the Packers. It's a matchup that you love. Detroit gives up a ton of points. Packers really just have to figure it out at some point. I'm just banking on it. They can't be terrible the entire season. Aaron Jones is getting leaned on heavily on this offense because Aaron Rodgers is struggling. The receivers are struggling. So somebody's got to step up. And A.J. Dillon has been doing nothing as of late. He had a decent game last week, but he's not getting many catches out of the backfield, whereas Aaron Jones is seeing a high reception volume every single week. You're playing Aaron Jones. Next up at number 5, we have Josh Jacobs, and it was about time that Josh Jacobs cooled down a little bit. He's going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars this coming week after 3 massive 30-point performances. How can you stay that hot for the rest of the season? It's really not possible unless you're the best running back of all time. It was a down week for the whole offense. They didn't even score a single point. I'm expecting a nice little bounce back game against a Jags team that is struggling right now. This could be a shootout because the defenses are both pretty bad, which means it might be a closer game, which would therefore fall into the Raiders' favor because they're a run-heavy team. Maybe they get into that run-heavy flow that they're used to, and we see a lot more Josh Jacobs action in this one. Next up is Travis Etienne against the Las Vegas Raiders in that same matchup. Etienne looked amazing against Denver, which is not an easy to put up good numbers against, and he did a fabulous job. He is going up against one of the worst defenses in the league. Like I was saying earlier, this should be a shootout. Both teams are going to score a lot of points. The only relevant running back in Jacksonville now that James Robinson is gone, so you can expect a ton of volume. You can expect a lot of pass catching upside with Etienne. I believe he only got 3 targets last week, which is very low for Etienne. I would expect a lot more in the future as he, gets more accustomed to his RB1 role. All right, dropping it down a tier, we have Dalvin Cook, and Dalvin Cook is going to be going up against the Washington Commanders in this matchup. He picked it up last week. I'll give him that. He had a 25-point week last week. You'd like to see that. And I feel like that was because it was more of a shootout game that he got that many points. His pass catching upside does give him a higher ceiling than most other running backs in the league. I don't necessarily love the matchup here against Washington because it could be low scoring. I feel like these teams sometimes have a tendency to go into low scoring affairs. So that could limit your expectations a little bit, but if you have Dalvin Cook, I don't see really how you're benching him against the Washington Commanders this week. Next up is a guy that I really just don't know what to do with, but I feel like I can't rank him any lower. If he has one more bad performance, we're gonna have to move him down even further on this list. It's Jonathon Taylor. You're most likely drafting Jonathon Taylor at the beginning of the year as your #1 running back, and he has been super, super disappointing. I know he got injured, but the games he's actually played in, still super disappointing for you. I can't find myself putting him lower than B tier this week, even though he's going up against New England defense that is very good. And I expect this to be a very low scoring game. You got Sam Ehlinger at quarterback for the Colts. This is not the same Colts team that ran the ball a ton against New England last year. Neither of these teams are the same. I feel like New England's defense kept more of their guys together than Indianapolis's offense. So Jonathon Taylor might have another rough week coming up here in New England. He just gets so much volume that I can't knock him down any lower than B tier, though. So if you have JT, you're still playing him. It's getting pretty unbearable. What did he have? 5 points last week? You just can't have that from a running back #1 on your fantasy team. Next up, we have Joe Mixon going up against the Carolina Panthers, and this needs to be a huge bounce back game for the Bengals. We saw that Monday night matchup against the Cleveland Browns. Looked absolutely terrible. The offense was not clicking whatsoever. They got down early. They never got it going on offense. It was pretty unbearable to watch. I don't even know what I was watching half the game there. Without Jamar Chase in this offense, they looked absolutely hopeless. I hope that they can figure it out next week, and I'm banking on a Cincinnati blowout, hopefully for Joe Mixon's case. He does get a lot of targets out of the backfield and also gets a ton of volume, a lot of rushes, especially if the games are close. He's probably not going to see that kind of volume when you're getting blown out by the Browns, but every other week he should be seeing a good amount of volume. And I'm playing Joe Mixon confidently against the Carolina Panthers. Now, dropping it down another tier here, we have Dameon Pierce going up against the Eagles. Not a great matchup here at all for Pierce, but Philly did give up a couple touchdowns a few weeks ago to the Cowboys running backs when they played against him. I think Dameon Pierce is a very hard runner week in and week out. Sees around 4 consistent targets a game out of the backfield. I would like to see a little bit more, especially on an offense that tends to get down early on and stay down the entire game. But he does see a good amount of volume for a struggling offense. So I think in most leagues, you're still playing Pierce, but I wouldn't expect, a 30, 40-point game from Pierce against an Eagles defense that is very good, at least so far this year. Next up, we have Ramondre Stevenson. And you got to love what you're seeing out of Ramondre Stevenson this year. Is going up against the Indianapolis Colts. He has, in my eyes, I have him in, I think, 2 or 3 leagues. He's taken over the #1 role from Damian Harris since that injury. He's getting tons of target volume out of the backfield, which you love to see. Good, efficient running week in, week out. The matchup is just holding him back a little bit. That's the only real reason. I said earlier, I think this could be a low-scoring affair, which it might be. So that's why you're going to put a little bit of a cap on Stevenson here. But even if it is low scoring, he's getting a ton of volume. He's getting a ton of carries and a ton of targets. You got to be playing him. Next up, we have Kenneth Walker going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Listen, Walker is going to get around 20 touches if this game stays close. And most of Seattle's games, if not all of them this year, they've either been out in front by a lot or the games have been close because they've been playing out of their mind, way above expectations. Hopefully for Walker, that continues. He's not getting too much volume in the passing game, though. That's one of the things that I don't like about Kenneth Walker. Actually, about the only thing that I don't like about Kenneth Walker. I think he's a hard runner. I think he's a great player. This is a divisional game, though, so I might expect it to be a little bit closer than normal, maybe lower scoring than normal. And he's also a little bit TD dependent. He has a lot of touchdowns on the year, but if he doesn't get into the end zone last week, it's a very poor day for him. Let's hope he picks it up a little bit more this week and scores a little bit more points against a pretty stingy Cardinals defense when they actually look like they want to be there. Dropping down a tier here, we have Miles Sanders going up against the Houston Texans. And I would expect the Eagles to go up early and stay out in front for the majority of this game, if not all of this game. Eagles have led almost every game that they played in, I think, except one. So there's been good volume in the past for Sanders when Philly is leading. I can expect probably a 10 to 15 point performance from Miles Sanders on a week in and week out basis. So you're starting this guy preferably as your running back 2 in most leagues, but he's still in your lineup against the Texans defense that isn't great. Dropping down another tier here, we have Leonard Fournette going up against a Rams defense that is not the same as it was in the past, all right? These are two teams that when you hear their names, Bucks and Rams, you're thinking two very good defenses, and that has not been the case at all this year. Both teams are going to be super desperate for a win, by the way. They are struggling mightily this year, so I think they try to get their best players involved early and often. Rachaad White is the only thing that's really steering me away from Lenny. He's getting older. Rachaad White might take more of his snaps and an increased role every single week as the season goes on here. So I think that's something we have to monitor and something to look out for sure. He's not too efficient on the ground this season at all either. So it's kind of a middle ground. I mean, you drafted Lenny pretty early, I would imagine. So you're going to want to keep playing him for a couple more weeks at least. If Rachaad White creeps up on him and takes a lot more targets away and a lot more rushing attempts away from him, then I would start to get really worried about Lenny. Next up, we have Raheem Mostert going up against the Chicago Bears. This is a solid matchup against a 26th ranked Chicago run defense. Mostert gets a lot of volume, but they did just trade for Jeff Wilson. So we're going to have to monitor that situation over the upcoming weeks. If Jeff Wilson starts eating into Mostert's, volume, then we're going to have a big problem. And this is going to be a running back by committee, which we don't want to see because that's just not good for either of these players if you're fantasy owners of them. The Dolphins could jump out to an early lead and maybe lead this entire game, which would be good for Mostert. And I could still be comfortable playing him this week. I don't think Jeff Wilson really gets involved in this offense too much until the upcoming weeks. So like I said, we got to monitor that. But as of right now, Raheem Mostert's a solid play against the Chicago defense that's struggling. Next up, we have D'Onta Foreman going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. 2 games right now with back-to-back 100-plus rushing yard performances on an offense that has been so bad. PJ Walker is actually playing really good, though, and making this offense look a lot better than it actually is, I feel like. You should have hope for Foreman for the rest of the season, though. If you have this guy on your roster, you're playing him, and you're feeling pretty confident after those 2 solid weeks that he just had. No more McCaffrey eating up his target share out of the backfield. Chuba Hubbard was injured this past week, so he did get a little more work than normal. If you see one more big game from Foreman, I would constantly be starting this guy, and I'm moving him far up my list if he gets one of those another 100-plus rushing yard performances this upcoming week. Bengals are coming off that huge loss like I was talking about earlier. I'm expecting them to bounce back big here and clamp down on defense, maybe lower expectations just a tad for Foreman, but he runs like a beast and he's got some high potential for these upcoming weeks for sure. Next up is going to be DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. It's kind of like a split backfield right now. They're going to be going up against the Green Bay Packers, which is a matchup that I do not love. I also don't love what I saw out of DeAndre Swift this past week. Even though he did get into the red zone, he clearly was not 100% still, and Jamal Williams is taking a lot of that red zone work away from him, which kind of is bad for both of these guys. You kind of want, on this offense, these guys are 2 studs. You want one of them getting all the work if you have them in fantasy. If not, and you're starting them, you're just hoping that one of them gets into the end zone at this point. That's why I don't really love playing either one of them. I'm going to have to wait until Swift is 100% healthy here to really gauge the potential that he's got in this offense with Jamal Williams still here, taking up that red zone target share and red zone rushing opportunities. For Green Bay, this is a must-win game. I'd expect some pretty good defense from them, hopefully. But I'm going to stray away from these 2 guys this week. All right, next up, we got Devin Singletary going up against a New York Jets defense that is not too bad this year. Bills do not run the ball too often, though. They also just traded for Nyheim Hines and they have James Cook, which this could be a triple backfield. 3 running back by committee backfield. You don't love to see that at all. I'd expect a close game here just purely because it's divisional, and I expect the Bills to throw a lot more than they had to against the Green Bay Packers on Sunday night. Next up is going to be Tyler Algier going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. This is most likely the last week that you're going to be playing Algier in any league formats because Cordero Patterson is going to come back and take a large share of that workload off his back. Chargers have a terrible defense, though. I believe they're 31st in the league against the run. So that sets up Algier for a great matchup. He seems to be the only one in the backfield who can catch a ball right now until Cordell returns. He's coming back to practice on Wednesday. Obviously, if he plays, you're not going to play Algier in your lineup. He's also splitting the backfield right now with Caleb Huntley, which is really limiting him. Huntley has been much more effective on the ground than Algier has. So you got to keep that in mind when plopping him into your lineup. But if you need a guy at the flex position, I wouldn't think twice about playing Algier against a terrible Chargers defense right now. Next up, we have David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert, the tandem duo going up against the Miami Dolphins here. This offense, they've stated multiple times they're going to give it to whoever has the hot hand. Herbert has looked so much more efficient than Monty this year. I don't love what I'm seeing out of David Montgomery. I really do not. I'm surprised they didn't trade him, honestly. And I would not be surprised in the slightest if Khalil Herbert takes his job by the end of the year, if not a couple weeks down the road. Monty is still the starter as of right now. This is also not a great matchup where they may go down early on, which makes me think Herbert might get even more of the work than normal. I don't know. I'm probably staying away from both of these guys, but I'm definitely keeping Khalil Herbert on my radar for future weeks. Maybe I would be selling David Montgomery at this point if you can, get a better player for him. Next up is going to be James Conner going up against the Seattle Seahawks. James Conner is still not 100% healthy. That's why he's so far down on this list. He gets consistent about 3 targets per game, has not been efficient at all this year, and only 1 touchdown so far. He was super touchdown dependent in the past seasons. He'd have a couple games where he'd score like 2, 3. I think there was even one game where he scored 4 touchdowns, and he was like that pop-off guy. He's really not that guy anymore. So I would be straying away from him against the Seattle Seahawks. If you have a better option, play the better option. Next up is going to be Antonio Gibson. It might be a little bit of a shocker here. He's going up against the Minnesota Vikings this week. Brian Robinson Jr. straight up stole this guy's job, but is not doing anything with it right now. Antonio Gibson is seeing the most passing volume that he's ever seen on this team, I feel like. And he's not even the starter of the team. This is the only backup running back that I have actually on this list that I would consider playing in the flex spot if I really needed a guy, because he keeps finding the end zone week in and week out. I think these past 2 weeks, he's found the end zone while Robinson was a starter, and he's outscored him both weeks. This is a game where they should have to claw their way back into it the entire time, I feel like, or these teams won't be able to score any points, which is a little bit more likely, I feel like. But if they do find themselves down big early, Gibson's going to be in for an even more increased role. I might look at Gibson as a pretty decent flex play against Minnesota. Last but not least, we have Michael Carter, and we also have James Robinson. I feel like it really doesn't matter here in this offense who is going to start, who is going to back up. They're splitting carries regardless. The matchup is not good whatsoever. Neither of these guys are going to fill Breece Hall's role that he left. The poor guy in his ACL. He was looking like an absolute superstar out here. Regardless, Michael Carter, James Robinson, you're not starting either of these guys in your lineups. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned something. If you did, make sure to drop that thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're just getting started here on Fantasy Phenoms. I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good one.